isn't necessarily about the technological architecture, but maybe about the motivations that countries are trying to solve for. So we've heard a lot about questions around sovereignty. So a lot of countries are thinking about how do we build data exchange systems that are amplifying sovereignty. We also have been looking at motivations such as delivery of government services, which obviously is a big use case for governments. We also look at questions like how do we make sure that there's transparency and accountability in the data exchange ecosystem, and models emanate from that. And I have an incredible panel to talk about some of these frictions. And I'm joined by Vijay from the Gates Foundation, Chennai from Masakane, Saranya from Razorpay, and Rahul from Trilegal. These are some of the minds who are going to be have written and are doing a lot of the incredible work around how do we build data exchanges. And I just wanted to start with a quick question to the panel, and we'll just go this way and then come right back. Is do you think that there are these frictions between unlocking data for innovation on one end, but then also maybe safeguarding it for sovereignty? And how do we think about community value from that perspective as well? Start with Vijay.
Okay, well, it's great to be here. You talked about tensions. I think there's data generation, there's data sharing, and then there's the safeguards. So they're kind of pulling in different directions, and it's all about incentives at the core. So there's got to be a viable sustainability model or a business model. So it's got to be value exchange. I think that's really at the heart of all of this. Is there a value being exchanged? If so, then you can get all the stakeholders lined up and get data exchange going.
Thanks, Asta. I feel like if we give you the right answer, you will have $1 million. This is $1 million question. But to put it out there, yes, there are tensions. There are tensions around who actually has the data and who's considered the data steward, particularly looking at African languages. The assumption is there's a cultural and social nuance to it, and there are identity markers. So it's not everybody who can simply say, I am creating this language without actually following the appropriate route. And then there's also kind of like the point that Vijay is talking about, the value exchange. It also comes back to the value exchange for that particular, if you're thinking about community, which is that when looking at African languages, it cannot just focus on an individual. It has to be community driven, because that is the typology of most different cultures and exchanges and relationship building. It's based on community. But the question becomes whose value in that community, because we still do exist in a context of gendered inequality, rural inequity based on rural versus urban. So someone who sits in a university in an urban area might say, great, let's go collect this language from that rural community so that we can provide some technical solution without consulting that community. And they will think that they are the person who can make the decision because they hold the university qualification. And that rural community might actually then say, absolutely not, because you will begin to learn things about us that we have managed to exist and be under the radar without this knowledge being public. So then that is the question that needs to be added on into the value and understanding the tensions, particularly thinking about community, power, and already existing inequalities.
Thank you. Saranya?
No, I think in its current format, yes, tensions do exist. But my argument, it doesn't have to be that way. I think fundamentally, to your point as well, the friction comes about when there is a difference between the entities being able to extract value and the data contributors or the actual data creators themselves. And the current structures do not allow for those to be in the same hands of the same person. We look at, for a very, pardon my very crude framing, but we look at, let's say, some version of big tech being the entities that extract value, and that the entities holding are in this constant, they find the tension as why they do not see the value being extracted as coming about to bring value to themselves. they do not see the data extraction process as giving anything to them. And so it is the balance between sovereignty in terms of protectionism, keeping the data out of those hands, because there is no world where they are envisioning where that value process benefits them as well. Once, and I completely with you, that is a little utopian, and I'm sure that's why so many billion minds are in this room. But once we figure out a way to bring back value in the data extraction process to the entities contributing or creating those data sets, then at least the incentive process doesn't need to be an either or. It becomes more streamlined, and then we can get to the actual business of extracting the data, because ultimately that is a requirement, and in all of this conversation sometimes that gets completely subsumed.
Before you jump in, I just wanted to throw something at you, because I know you have this paper on the New Deal for Data, which also talks about, what are the different kinds of rights we're trying to safeguard against, and also how do we solve for some of that epistemic injustice that Chennai touched upon. And so are you proposing that this New Deal for Data will take us closer to the utopia?
Short answer, yes. I wouldn't have spent 3 months writing the paper if I didn't think at least I'd have a chance. But I'm going to now, since when you said we've decided to disagree, you were looking at me. I'm clearly the disagreeable one. I'm going to start disagreeing, which is first with the fact that tension is a bad thing.
Okay.
I think it's actually great that there's tension.
I agree with that.
When there is tension, we are forced to think hard about the decisions we make. If there's no tension, we stop thinking, right? So I'm glad that there is a tension, and I would be more worried if the world starts to think there is no tension. And and I think quite frankly, a lot of us in today's world don't recognize that there is a tension, and that really is a problem with all the things that we've said so far. So first, I would like to say, embrace the friction. Friction is a good thing. It allows us, before we take a decision, to think hard about the balance that we're making. The point that I make in the paper is essentially that the governance frameworks that we have today, and I picked two really. I pick data protection, I pick copyright, and then I speak about data sovereignty. But that's sort of not an issue that we have. I think, as Chennai says, it's an issue that AI brings to the fore that we really have to think about. But if you think about data protection is a framework where we have enforced data scarcity. We believe that the way to protect personal information and then the way to protect privacy is for the people who collect it to have as little of it as possible, which is why you need consent before you collect. You are obliged to only collect for a narrow purpose. You are obliged to only collect as much data as is required to achieve the purpose, data minimization. You're required to delete the data after it has served the purpose, retention restrictions. This is the global framework for data protection. It's a framework that we have in our country. I suspect it's a framework we have around the world. This framework is at odds with what artificial intelligence needs, because AI needs as much information as possible for as long as possible. So there is a friction now with the governance frameworks. If you think about copyright is a lot, I mean, the paper is utterly provocative. It's like, it's shocking that I managed to get away with publishing the paper, because it's such a heretical paper. Essentially, as a lawyer, I'm going against everything that I've studied for, I'm not going to say how. Well, no, I've been writing about this for a while. I mean, I've been moving in this direction for a long time. But copyright is essentially, you have the word copy in copyright, and therefore you assume that you can't do any copying. That's not true. When we read a book, we sort of copy it in our head. And how different is that from the weights being adjusted in the large language model? And so I say the fundamental basis on which most people are going against copyright is that you cannot copy a book. Now, quite frankly, the large language model does not copy a book. It reads the book, it adjusts its weight, but nowhere in the large language model is a copy of the book stored. It just does not exist. It may be in the company. I told you it's heretical. The moment I say something, they will shut the mic down. But it may be in the company, but it does not exist in the model. And so there is a fundamental need for us to rethink the way we have governed data. Because if we don't rethink the way we've governed data, we're not going to be able to get the benefit of all that AI has to give us. Having said that, I'm not Rambo in the Wild West. I do understand that AI is dangerous. It could cause harm, and we've got to be utterly mindful about how we go down the path. And I'm not going to spoil the surprise, because you all have to download the paper and read it for yourself. There is a solution that I prescribe for all of these things, and perhaps we can discuss that in more detail.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yes, very, very provocative paper because it is walking back a lot of the rights frameworks that we've all attached a lot of importance to over the last few years because, you know, we need some shred of hope in all of this to negotiate. But Saranya, to you, you know, you also have a paper. Please also read that. And in your paper, you talk about a decentralized marketplace. And I think the question again is that, you know, if we are just allowing data to flow and people to train their models, then there will be some accumulation of capital that we have been talking about. So if everything is a marketplace, then people who have deeper pockets will just buy more things, right? So
Yes.
how does the proposal that you have like solve for some of that? Yeah.
The way that current marketplaces do.
Yeah.
So it's not an either or, and thank you for the chance to plug my paper.